And as we mark Chernobyl's anniversary, many say that the world has failed to learn the lessons on nuclear safety that the tragedy provided. Well, I'm now joined by Professor Christopher Busby. He's Scientific Secretary of the European Committee on Radiation Risks, for a little more insight into this century's most serious nuclear crisis there in Japan. Professor Busby, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Well, there have been reports, not widely covered by the media, that one of the explosions at Fukushima was not actually a gas blast, as originally thought, but a nuclear reaction in one of the reactor vessels. Now, surely if that was the case, the plant's operator TEPCO, they wouldn't conceal such a catastrophic development, would they?
I think it's possible that they would conceal this development. The nuclear industry has a history of duplicity and cover-up. Wherever you look, they will always try and shift the information in some way that makes them come out on top. I believe actually it probably was a nuclear explosion, but not in the reactor, but in the tanks that contain the spent fuel. I think that seems to be almost certain now, that there was some kind of nuclear explosion in that tank, the one that contained the plutonium MOX fuel rods. I mean, anyone who saw that on the video and saw that enormous explosion wouldn't have believed that it was a hydrogen explosion.
What would the consequences be if that is the case, that it was indeed a nuclear explosion, not hydrogen?
Well, not a lot different, actually. The problem is that the fuel rods, enormous number of radioactive fuel rods, have been blasted into the air and have vaporized. So there's a great deal of radioactivity around there. And also there has been a meltdown, and as we understand it, there is still fissioning taking place. Maybe there, but also maybe as a result of cracks in the vessels themselves. So we've got fissioning taking place in those reactors, and I believe there's about 10 to the 14. That's 1 in 14 zeros of becquerels of radioactivity coming out every day. Now, this is a very serious matter. I have to say that there is evidence that the Chernobyl nuclear reactor was also a nuclear explosion. The Chernobyl accident was a nuclear explosion. We heard details a couple of weeks ago in Berlin of isotopic measurements that were made of xenon isotopes that showed that it was a nuclear explosion and not a hydrogen explosion. So that also was a nuclear explosion.
Well, many analysts have said there isn't much of a comparison between the two, between Chernobyl and Fukushima. You indeed have actually said Fukushima could be a lot worse than Chernobyl. Looking at the situation now, would you still stand by that this situation has not been resolved and it could be a lot worse?
I think it could be a lot worse, and the reason that it could be a lot worse is because it's much less under control than Chernobyl was. I have to say that the Soviet system moved very fast to try and contain what was happening at Chernobyl, and that the Japanese have been very, very lax in the way in which they took people out of exclusion zone, and they still haven't emptied enough people out of an exclusion zone, which should, as far as I'm concerned, go out at least 60 or 70 kilometers. They're measuring enormous amounts of radioactivity on the ground out to 70 kilometers, reporting this. And these are amounts that are higher than the amounts in the Chernobyl exclusion zone. And we have increases in radioactivity near Tokyo or south of Tokyo. So the difference really is that there's a very, very much larger population at risk in Japan than there was in Chernobyl. Luckily, the Chernobyl radiation went north and didn't go south to Kiev. So the population that was exposed was not as great. But I have to say, in the calculations that we've made, the cancer deaths from Chernobyl have been in the region of about 1 million. 1,400,000 we calculated at this conference in Berlin using the ECRR risk model. And we're expecting approximately the same, probably as a result of Fukushima, certainly if people aren't evacuated.
Sorry to interrupt. Why is it when I read independent analysts on other news websites saying that the long-term health damage is not yet known, but the risks to human health are thought to be low? And indeed, no deaths so far have been reported as a result of radiation contamination there in Fukushima. Is this because it's all too early to tell, or are you perhaps overreacting and exaggerating what the situation could be, that some people might say?
It's not because it's too early to tell. I mean, as far as Chernobyl is concerned, we already know the epidemiological measurements have been done. There have been plenty of studies done that show increases in cancer and an enormous range of ill health following Chernobyl. And I have to say that people who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. As far as the people who are talking this down are concerned, they are generally people connected to the nuclear industry, and there's an awful lot of money, I have to say, running on whether this is the case or not.
just briefly, the Japanese authorities are confident that they'll be able to sort all this out within the next 9 months, cool the reactors, stop the leaking of the radiation. Do you believe that putting this cover over and sorting this problem out could actually be achieved in 9 months' time and would be the end of a potential catastrophe?
I'm sorry, I had some trouble with the earplug.
I'm sorry, yeah, I think I've just lost you there for a second. Just briefly, are you confident, or perhaps not as confident as the Japanese authorities are saying, that this could all be resolved by putting this protective cover over the plant, and indeed that the reactors will be cooled down and the leaking will stop within 9 months from now? Is that realistic?
I think it's unlikely. I think it's unlikely. If you put a protective cover over this, over a reactor which is still fissioning, then the fission products will just go into the ground and they'll be washed out into the sea and they will still come out. You can't seal a fissioning reactor by putting concrete on it. It's just not possible.
And just finally, briefly, you mentioned washed out to sea. Chernobyl on land. There's Fukushima right on the Pacific Ocean coast. How significant is that in terms of radiation contamination on a much wider field away from Japan? Just briefly.
Well, we're already picking up material in the United States, and concentrations of uranium and plutonium are being picked up in Hawaii and in the Marianas Islands in air filters, and also the stuff that's contaminating the sea will go all along the coast. It's a very, very serious situation, and it's being talked down, as I say, by the nuclear industry and by the Japanese authorities. And in my opinion, this is a very serious matter, because people are going to get sick and die as a result of this.
Professor Christopher Busby, very interesting to talk to you. Thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us there live in London.
Okay.